Yeah, we're back with AP GoPo 2018, home of the Flying Eagle or something. All right, big idea one. We're starting the actual specific content. Doesn't mean what we did with chapter one is irrelevant. Actually, the ideas of pluralism and elitism are specifically laid out, as is a lot of the participatory processes and what makes up a democracy, specifically the idea of constitutional democracy. So really, all you're doing with that adjective is adding rules, a set of guidelines, established guidelines on how to run the democracy. And what you'll see then, it limits the democracy so that it just isn't what we would call mob rule. Remember, that word simply means people rule or people govern. And the fear there is, how the heck would you even manage that? So let us begin by looking at what 1A says. And you should be following along in your text, page 26 through 30, 45 through 49, and 52 through 54. And if you look at the actual language of College Board, that is what we're doing. So we're looking at the balance between governmental power, authorita, and individual rights has been a hallmark of America political development. I talked about it. It's a tightrope act, and it goes beyond American political development. Every country deals with that power of government to regulate society for the security of all, but also protecting the individual rights of individuals to do what you want for freedom. So a nice quote there. What is the essence of America? So if you're looking at political culture, finding and maintaining that perfect, delicate balance between freedom to, meaning do the things you want to do, which means there are consequences to your actions, but at least you have the freedom to do it, versus freedom from, which really now you're looking at the governmental powers of protecting you from those. You have a freedom to avoid poverty, perhaps, a freedom from, that's usually where you hear it in the most cases, and we don't have that. It's not in the Constitution of freedom from poverty. We have more freedoms too, but we've shifted that conversation to freedom from misery, freedom from war, freedom from oppression. And so my freedom to yell on a street corner, do you have freedom to not hear that? Just live your life in peace. So it's that balancing act there, which becomes the important factor to navigate through. 3 objectives of this section. So it's, again, 1A. We want to be able to compare how models of representative democracy are visible in major institutions, policies, even debates in the U.S. So namely, all these kind of flow together because we're going to be tagging that with one of the United States foundational documents. We will look a little bit at the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, but primarily going into the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist views, which are in the Brutus Papers, on what the role of the government should in terms of individual freedoms. We're going to debate that as well. So it won't be just your feelings and opinions. You're going to be winding back the hands of history and understanding the founding fathers, if you use that term, their viewpoints on either side of the spectrum. So that's coming up soon. So let's move on. We have to start with kind of where we talked about today in this. I usually like to do this in classes. I know I have your attention, but for sake of time, and maybe we'll come back to it. You're really looking at the Enlightenment philosophers of John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, and Rousseau. I don't say Rousseau's first name because it's Frenchy, and I'm just going to sound like an idiot if I try. So we put these in chronological order. Thomas Hobbes and John Locke were contemporaries. They existed in England at about the same time. And we're discussing the role of government after and in the era of the English Civil War, where Oliver Cromwell emerged as a dictator after they beheaded their king. And so if you start with those 2 premises on this social contract theory, the idea is, what should the role of government be? You can start with Thomas Hobbes, who has a very, very negative view of human nature, in that he wouldn't be comfortable using the word evil necessarily because that would have a biblical implication. Most of these individuals are deists, not believing in a higher power as prescribed by any scripture, but in a higher power that set order to the universe, and that is all. So in essence, they argue what man is like in the state of nature. And it's Thomas Hobbes who believed that we are completely motivated by self-interest, and that is all. And so without order, we would degrade into a society of people just simply doing what's best for them with disregard of others. He also recognizes, though, that humans are rational. And through his ideas, he develops the initial social contract idea, is that individuals in a state of nature rationalize, not because I like you and want you protected, but by entering an agreement with a group, we can protect our lives that way. We're just safer. So he was in favor of absolute monarchies, not based on divine right, but based on the ideas of the Enlightenment, that this would be someone of merit ultimately. But that government is not arbitrary and could not go away. And it could do anything it needed to do in order to preserve the security of the state being the borders of which that sovereign monarch in this case would control, and all the individuals in there. So this government would have no qualms about having public curfews, for example, if it kept people safe. Taking away the right to bear arms of people because that could be a threat to each other. In his case, government should have all the authority because people are inherently selfish, would be sort of the word, that we're going to constantly be in a state of war without that. And sort of to have peace. And when you're in peace, you have, in his idea, liberty, more freedom to do as you please. In a state of ultimate freedom, you have no liberty because you're constantly worried like a nervous little chipmunk. So the idea really is that as long as government is providing security, it's better than the alternative, which is anarchy, chaos, war, beheadings, death, constant factions fighting, gang warfare, everything that you see in Walking Dead, basically, or any kind of dystopia where the world ends and people are thrown back to a pre-civilization. So he sees it as it manifests itself. That is why you're at where you're at. That's why you have absolute monarchs in Europe. And that is the idea behind it. Along comes John Locke, who agrees and disagrees. And it's really from John Locke that we Americans have found our sources. So he comes up with the idea of the natural rights. And it's from this that we steal the phrase, all men are created equal. And so his idea is that all men are born blank, called it tabula rasa. The idea that we're born with nothing and our experiences solely shape us. And it's through those experiences that we develop rationality. And it's from this blankness that we're equal. But, as soon as we start living, we're no longer equal. Different hospitals, different parents, different schools, different cities, that changes. However, he does agree with John Locke in that people came together. This is kind of what me and Davin did. And as you can see there, you don't kill me, I don't kill you. Hey, sounds great. So we gave up absolute freedom in favor of a rational existence of working together. And when we did that, at whatever period in history, that became a compact, an agreement, a contract among social individuals, thus the social contract theory. So in his case, though, because we ultimately made that agreement, government is ultimately accountable to the people to protect their natural rights. And what are these natural rights that Locke articulates? One, that we should have the right to be alive, life. If we're born, we have life, ergo, it should be protected. We have a right to exist. That's his number one premise. The second is that we have a right to liberty. And I will offer an argument that liberty and freedom are not the same things. I use them sophomore year because it's just easier. But in his eyes, freedom is anarchy. Liberty is the recognized principle that we give up that very, very slim element of total freedom, being we agree to not kill each other. Thus, that becomes a law and it infringes my freedom. But because I don't have to worry about that, it affords me liberty. And from that liberty, I can then go about accumulating the essence of what I need to protect my own life, that being property. And Locke defines property as that which I have toiled with to improve. So if I take an abandoned piece of land and turn it into a field and produce corn or whatever, that's mine because it was my hands. If I then sell that corn to somebody else, the money they give me is mine because it's the fruit of my labor, is the idea. So in his view, government must protect those three things. That's the social contract. Life, liberty, and property, which Thomas Jefferson will rephrase to the pursuit of happiness. Why? I think it's a little more romantic notion that property doesn't necessarily bring happiness. Anyhow, from there, you have this idea where Hobbes would look at government is just there to make sure you stay alive. However they do that is fine. Where Locke would see any law that is prescribed by government must primarily protect natural rights. So if you're walking around America, because we're based on this idea, and you think a law is infringing on your freedom, it's not a rational law. It's not following the social contract. Now, I'll use a real easy one, is speeding. You could go like, hey, it's my right to go 80 miles an hour through this school zone. Dang it. And John Locke might, yeah, absolutely. Government should protect you. That's your freedom to do so. That is your liberty. However, the flip side of that is your individual freedom jeopardizing the social order? And it's not really necessarily the social order, but the individuals within the social order. What if you run one of them over? Therefore, your freedom just destroyed their life and any freedom they'll ever have again. So that law is actually protecting the majority's freedom against the individual in that case. And I think we're rational, so that law makes sense. Look at it also with a four-way stop sign. Do we actually need the stop signs there? If we're rational, we wouldn't, because it would make sense that we'd want to, stop or at least slow down because the possibility of other people coming down the road could exist. However, the law exists to protect the greater order, to preserve others' natural rights. That's sort of the idea. You throw the abortion and gun rights into this, and now you see why these issues never go away. So for abortion, for example, is it the person's freedom to choose what they do to their own person? Is their liberty? It's my body. It's not hurting anybody else. Mon frère. Or are you killing a life? Therefore, it is government's job to protect that life. That is the first premise of the natural right. The debate we continue to have is, when does the fetus become life? Is it when spermie meets eggy? Is it 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, 5 weeks later, et cetera, et cetera? Thus, the debate rages on. And man, we could really peel back the layers on that one as well, because then now, and this is for the sake of assumptions, that the fetus, let's say abortion is illegal. So the fetus becomes child and is born into a bad environment. Let's keep it general. Therefore, grows up with less opportunity than anyone else and now is homeless on the streets. Therefore, deprived of pursuit of happiness and pursuit of property. You don't have the skill set there. So would it become government's job to prop up that individual's life and property so that they can be totally free through welfare programs? However, those welfare programs come from tax dollars. Tax dollars are nothing more than property. So in that case, now government is infringing on the property rights of others. So you have that all going through. Want to apply gun rights to it? Let's do it. So it's in our Constitution that way, because another thing that Locke says, and this is what he was calling for, is that if government violates those rights, we have a right, absolute right, a duty to get rid of that government. Now, our Constitution lays it out through elections that we can do that, but what happens if the elections are not followed? majority rule is not followed, well, we're armed. And in that case, we can violently overthrow that government and establish a new one. So it's that kind of idea of the sovereign citizens ultimately hold the case. Now, the problem with gun rules, if you will, or lack of gun rules, is if everybody has a gun in society, does that not equal a threat to my life the same way a car does? Therefore, there should be regulations on who controls them, what, and where. I think geography, again, plays an important part in this discussion. And you'll see this when you break down the Constitution. Those who are urbanized and dealing with difficult economic tend to see government regulation with guns and things like that more favorable. Those who live in the country and do not have access to police that can get there in a hurry see guns as a means to protect their own. So it's this idea is incredibly complicated, and you can't say that there's right or wrong. You can definitely have your opinions. You can base it on your own experiences. You can base it on data. And you can be rational about it. But this is why we disagree on all sorts of things in politics. It all stems from this social contract theory. Do I even want to go into Rousseau at this point? Because it's a little different. Rousseau believed everything that society produced created inequity, and therefore violence trying to achieve equity. He thought property was the problem. This is one person claimed property. I wanted property. I needed property, actually, to survive. So I'm going to do anything I can, thus becoming a corrupt human. So his idea was government should not even really exist. The idea is that all you need is people, again, to come together and agree on what rules they want. So really the people themselves become the government. They're not putting an aberration somewhere out there, whether it be a monarch or a Congress or a president. They themselves maintain their role as government. And he calls this idea the general will. And so with his, where Hobbes and Locke say you actually surrender your freedom to a sovereign for liberty, Rousseau says you surrender your freedom to the majority, to the what he calls the will of the people. And from there, you must obey the general will. That's what you serve. So there's no such thing as minority rights. It's the idea that you're participating for what's best for society, and the majority ultimately decides that. His theory lends itself to communism, fascism, any system where the group majority supersedes minority rights. Hobbes would too, in a sense, but Locke is the only one who asserts the individual supersedes what the group wants. You ultimately have a right to live your life to the way you want to, as long as it's in accordance with the law, and the law should be there to defend rights, not take away. But as you just saw or listened to, very complicated. Woo! Oh. We'll watch this together. I'm watching it too. I love 3-minute philosophies, but it contrasts Hobbes and Locke. It does a little bit of epistemology and study of knowledge, but then it gets into political theories as well. So John Locke, as they would say, would be a member of the Libertarian Party today. Very, very limited government. However, could one have foreseen the complications that arose? And so here it is just in picture form, right? We, the people, we give up our absolute freedom for liberty. We put, there's inconveniences of freedom, if you will. I always think about the nervous chipmunk and squirrel. Do you really want to live like that, where anyone can stab you in the throat anytime they want without consequences? So, the natural thing is to bind together to find groups that don't do that. So you put in a leadership there. Their primary job is to secure and protect. That's why police badges say serve and protect, to protect the freedoms that remain. But you give them the convenience to decide what that means. And if you don't like it, you get rid of them one way or the other. So there you go. Civil government is the proper remedy for the inconveniences of the state of nature. And because we're born blank, we should all have equal access to life, liberty, etc. Doesn't mean we're all equal. It means we have equal access to, right? You're not all going to get the same grade, but you all have the same opportunity to get what you want. That's what freedom. So you have the freedom to choose that. So you have the freedom to fail. Some of you want the freedom from failing by just, And that's really not the foundation of this course or the society. It's the idea of freedom is responsibility. All right, moving on. Oh, another good video. These are 8-bit philosophies. These are sweet. Do we need government? This one juxtaposes Locke. I think it's Locke. Or it might be Hobbes. Hobbes and Rousseau. Fun fact about Rousseau, shares a birthday with me, June 28th. Not sure what year he was born. King Henry VIII also has that birthday. Not to mention former Cubs legend Mark Grace, Duke basketball star Bobby Hurley, and quarterback of the Denver Broncos, John Elway. My wife also has the same birthday. Not that any of you care, but moving on. Okay, so the ideas of John Locke point to the concept we see in the concept, we the people. This is the concept of popular sovereignty. Sovereignty is one of my favorite words in the English language. So what it looks at is the idea that you are ruling. So popular sovereignty is really majority rules, but we do have the understanding that the minorities must have the same rights to continue to participate in that process. So popular sovereignty is the basis of it's we the people. Ultimately, power rests in the hands of the people. However, personhood legally is different in 1776 than it is in 2018. Is it 2018 already? That makes me kind of old. Oh, well. Yeah. Wait, that'd be a good one. Game over. Not yet, but the older I get, the sooner. So let's make it count. Okay, so none of the founding fathers were in favor of democracy. They thought, what, are you freaking kidding me? They understood, and they take it from Locke, remember, and you could argue this now based on modern psychology and philosophy, that we're not primarily driven by self-interest, but this is what they were understanding. And if you give uneducated, untrained, unsophisticated, irrational, hyper-emotional, mob-type people power to choose, they will absolutely go in their own self-interest and sometimes not even know what their own self-interest is good for them. They're also subject to emotional outpours. I recall several Simpsons episodes where there's any kind of like a town hall meeting. Once one person says something, they all freak out and grab pictures, and that's not going to lead to any stable society if you leave governing to the whims of the masses, the polloi. It also lends itself to the minority being completely eliminated. Rousseau was in favor of this. He believed that 51% could not be wrong because it's what the majority actually wanted. It's a little romantic notion of the human character because he believed we were inherently good, if you will, or selfless. And there is modern psychology that suggested, if you study mirror neurons, the idea of empathy, there are sociopaths that don't respond the same way. But we either lock those people up or they run for office or become police and teachers, usually people in positions of power. Weird how that works. So let's move on from there. Thank you, TJ. Although he will be a advocate for a more democratic form in the Constitution. So what we get with a republic, and we talk about republicanism, small r, what you pledge to daily, is the idea that we have a system that represents us. Republic literally means to be public again. So you're electing ideally you're better to serve your needs. So it also assumes, that it gets a little complicated that you're picking your better to represent you, or at least someone like you. Initially, you got to remember, only those who could vote in this country, and this was by design, was white males. I think there was an age, I had to look it up again, who own land. The idea simply being those who own property want society to stay stable. So they're going to vote to keep stable society moving forward. That is the ultimate goal of government. So you can really see the inherited conservatism in the foundation of this country. It wasn't like the French or other revolutions that were more radical. This was a conservative movement to protect the status quo of the landowners, not necessarily because they were greedy, but because why wouldn't a poor bum vote for a welfare program or which costs other people money, or vote for a radical candidate or a populist candidate who just says crazy things that people want to hear, even though he doesn't represent their interests at all. I mean, these are the things they thought about. These are the things we have forgotten. So maybe you don't have the right to vote because our founding fathers knew a little bit about human biology and understood that you're not completely rational individuals yet. Some of you are. And that magic number 18 is a guideline for when our brains sort of become fully developed. It probably should be more like 25, truthfully. But if you can die in a war, they're going to give you that idea. Because it used to be 21, not until the Vietnam War, it moved to 18. So a republic is that idea, a representative democracy that limits people, but it also limits government. It's a compromise of sorts. Right? So you have three theories on representative democracies. Participatory, which calls for everybody to participate as much and often. Pluralist, which says you don't need to have everyone vote all the time. People are driven by single issues mostly. They can find their group, let the group do it. And then there's elite representative, the idea that those with the most clout in society based on land, property, wealth should be governing society because they know the best, maybe, but definitely have the most to lose if things go sour. So let's not try to be too biased on those issues. It does come down to human nature, ultimately. This little thing I found kind of represents it, right? There's your group planning. You got the individual saying, but then there's the people that you picked who handle the business. You can also dive into the idea of the complexity of governing. If everyone had to participate, when would you freaking even go to the bathroom, man? There's so many, tax codes and rules and regulations, state to state, trade, financing. You got to take a lifetime to master some of these things. Yet you want the general population to just participate willy-nilly and make those decisions? Maybe. Could be disastrous, though. So maybe pluralism is the way to go, where you allow those people outlets to form groups, and the best group with the best idea can then filter that message. Or, and maybe it's some variation, the elite system of this, which points to bosses and owners of society. And in republic, they'd still accountable to the people, as long as people follow what they're doing. And we might have a problem with that. We don't do that. We buy the rhetoric, we vote, and we tune out. The Bulls are on, so why would I care about a women's march? Or, those things are definitely participatory. Or something even more nefarious, some sort of policy action that is, being snuffed through. So moving on. I got a couple of vids, which would be good to put this into context. I know the Crash Course, and I know some people love, and I like Crash Course. I can sit there for 10 minutes and learn a lot. So there's this one, and then there's this one. John Green has two. One's for world history, one's for U.S. history, so there's a little different premise to each of those. I wouldn't mind watching in the class if that's the way you're going to do it. We would have time for that. I don't know. Saves me my voice for a day. And then there's this one. Definitely we need to watch this one because that's really what we're framing this conversation. We only have to be like minimally understanding of the American Revolution, but you really do know that it's based on the social contract theory to some extent, but then really it's not, because most Americans, I'd say 85%, could care less about any of that conversation that Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and Benjamin Franklin and James Madison and the beer guy, help me out, Adams, we're all talking about. That was a small ship-owning, slave plantation elite of Americans who didn't like that they were being taxed, which, right, they're having their property taken away, social contract. They propagated that, not to mention the British raised the taxes to pay for the war. The colonists most likely started with the Native Americans. You can go a little further back and maybe blame that war on the British. But there it is. You then have the American colonists destroying corporate and British property. Thus, troops were sent to Boston. They really, what the British should have done is just gave them what they wanted, which was always a representative seat at the table. They would have still been in the minority, and those taxes would have got raised anyway, and we'd all be drinking tea and playing frickin' cricket. But I digress. Yeah. Check them out. All right, our big conversation, though, is with the Constitution in place. And yes, we need to be familiar with the Constitution and all the amendments to it. But before that even happened, it's the debate surrounding the Constitution as a document. And you have now the Americans, we got to call them that, right? Under the leadership of Washingtheimer, not his real name, but that's what I call him, who said, don't let this happen. Do not split into factions. It'll be too divisive. And quickly we did. And you have the Federalists in favor of a strong federal government. And so those words, federal and Confederate, need to be discussed, probably in class, versus the anti-federalists, those who wanted to break from an authoritarian government. So the Federalists wanted to protect society from the mob. Anti-Federalists want to protect the common people from an oppressive government, the same thing they just broke away for. And right away, geography matters. You can see urban versus rural. So you can see these same lines being drawn throughout. And read through the rest of this because it gives you an idea of where we're heading with all of that. Still to this day, not so much anymore, but the idea of who ultimately is in charge, the federal government in Washington, D.C., originally in New York, or the state governments. And we also should probably talk about the etymology of the word statehood and why we're actually called states. Like France is a state. Britain is a state. Germany is a state. Technically, Georgia, not a state. Illinois, not a state. But technically, Illinois a state, Georgia a state. We Americans have been confusing each other from the get-go because we're trying something brand new. So America, at least we got the cojones to try something new. And as Benjamin Franklin said, as he's walked out of the Constitutional Convention, a lady asked him, what the hell did you guys come up with? He said, madam, we came up with a republic if we can hold it. Because he knew, oh my God, the danger of giving people choice. A lot easier just to control. Look at your classes. A lot easier for a teacher to sit there and control you than actually give you a freedom of choice. And it makes chaos sometimes. That's why I kind of think I operate in somewhere in the realm of controlled chaos. I've told that my whole life. All right, moving on. Oh, here we go. Shout out to you, Wells. You're Hamilton dude. So you got really people put Jefferson at the top of that list as the anti-federalist. As you can see what he says there. And then Hamilton as the Federalist. And we will let that debate ensue as we will be having it in this class. We'll be looking at the Federalist Paper number 10. The more agree with that, the more conservative you'll be, the more red. If you follow the Brutus argument, the more blue you tend to be, more liberal. And these terms are applying to 1800 and slightly before. And these terms shift and have become more complex, at least in America. So initially, those in favor of Brutus, power to the masses, states' rights, Jefferson, become the first political party, really, and they were the Democratic Republicans. We want a more democratic republic versus the Federalists, their party, just Federalist. We want a federal system. They both wanted a federal system. It's just about the balance of power. How much do you trust people? How much do you trust authority? Ironically, authority is made up of people, but supposedly they know better than the rest of us. So you can see these arguments are still out there, but how we view left and right and Democrats and Republicans, the true Republican Party doesn't come until 1860 under Lincoln, but the Jeffersonian Republicans or the Democratic Republicans, it's a mouthful, eventually just become the Democrats in 1828 under Andrew Jackass Jackson. Therefore, the jackass donkey becomes the emblem of that party due to its stubborn nation to change its ideas. All right. I just found this a little psych. So even to this day, now this is what's fun about this class is we know science. We can actually look at psychology and operation of brain traits and how that affects your political outcomes. So I'm actually going to run this by Jay Stock and see what he has to think about it. But so those of you in that class, we're always looking to insulate and spread. I think government class and psych, especially not the more we understand about the brain, and we talk about media manipulation, things like that, is incredibly important. So and guarantee those in power have studied what makes your brain work. It was the Nazis who first did it, and they figured it out. See, there's that mirror neuron idea, right? We reckon stronger mirror neurons. We are more. When I say we liberals, I guess in that, I don't know if I have strong mirror neurons. Maybe I'm a sociopath and I fake it. I took Stocks 1 test, and I was pretty much a psychopath, somewhat, not like fully, but I do have tendencies. I'm aware of it. I'm working on it. Maybe I'm just saying that to make it, I don't know. And then just read. It's pretty cool, pretty interesting. Again, these podcasts are meant to introduce these topics, not fully articulate and discuss them. And that's what class should be for. So expect a quiz on this. Let's see. Tomorrow I'll set you up with that. You'll have time to watch this. Thursday quiz on this. Discuss it. We'll set up the debate. Friday debate, and we'll work on the details of that. Okay. Well, that wasn't too bad of a show. So you can anticipate each of these, and there's 5 for Big Idea 1. So there'll be 4 more of these, and we'll follow this suit. We'll see how it goes, and when it's done, we'll have a big FRQ, and we'll also be doing some multiple choice. Yeah. So on that note. Is that a nuclear attack, or did Chump just tweet? Peace, I'm out of here.